All right. Good afternoon, folks. Thank you all for tuning in today, both on the News 6 WKMG page as well as Just Weather. I know a lot of you are probably very familiar with Jonathan Kagis running the Tropics Watch. However, he's been away, taking some time to himself post Helene, post Milton, which absolutely advocate for. Definitely needs that time to recoup and rest. And he will be back in the studio later on tonight, as a matter of fact. Wanted to give it a couple more days to let some of that model data stew out there because we are watching one particularly favorable spot in the South, Central, and Western Caribbean. So, folks, once again, thank you very much for joining me. I am News 6 meteorologist David Nazario, standing in for Jonathan Kagis, both on Just Weather and News 6. And we're going to go ahead and rock into our Tropics Watch. So, first and foremost, have some good news currently. This has been a bit kind of hard to come by for certain parts of the 2024 season, particularly most recently since probably late September, we've been just cranking. And even before that, we had Ernesto on the board as well as Francine, so we really haven't had a chance to breathe. But per the National Hurricane Center, we have no expected tropical development over the next 7 days, which is fantastic. We're kind of just riding the wave, everybody out there. We are post-Oscar, who did wreak a little bit of havoc on the Turks and Caicos Islands, the Southeast Bahamas, parts of Cuba. You can see now just to the top left of where the no tropical cyclone statement is positioned on the screen, we have that area of low pressure that's now affecting Bermuda, which if you've kept up with my Weather Center Nazario YouTube channel, I'd mentioned that as a post-tropical, a remnant low, no longer tropical in nature, Oscar would be ricocheting up towards the northeast and becoming a high wind and rain maker for Bermuda, and we're seeing that unfolding now. If you look back over the United States, and I can pan this over here in a second, I will if you guys want to, or let me know in the chat if you'd like me to go ahead and pan the map around just a little bit, the three-dimensional view here we have in our link system. But we have our next fall front. It's not going to be a strong one. Unfortunately, the last one we had come through down in our neck of the woods here in the southeast, Florida in particular, we had a nice drop in our surface temps. We were sitting pretty in the upper 50s in the morning and only the mid to upper 70s in the afternoon, which is phenomenal. You can see down there in the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, even the majority of the Atlantic basin is pretty quiet. We do have some thunderstorm activity along the intertropical convergence zone down there on the bottom right-hand portion of the screen. You can see all the clouds down there just off the coast of Venezuela, the Guianas in South America, expanding across the main development region of the Atlantic in particular. And then we also have major Hurricane Kristy in the East Pac. They were going through a bit of a tropical cyclone famine not too long ago out in that neck of the woods, and now we are finally starting to see the MJO that's going to be rocking through our area, the actual Atlantic AOR of the big picture weather pattern, and that could possibly cause some trouble for us down in the Western Caribbean. So we will go ahead and move right along. Let me go ahead and play my loop here so we can start progressing. This is one last look at the NHC page brought to us by our Pinpoint Weather Center here. No tropical cyclone activity over the next 7 days. We'll press forward, and you can see here this is going to be our tropical satellite, and I will zoom us out so we can get a big picture perspective. This is very reminiscent of what I would typically do for my own live stream back at the home weather station. So you can see large plume of moisture, definitely not tropical with what's left of Oscar. A lot of the dry air that's kept our rain chances and a majority of us across the South and Eastern United States fairly low. Some of us are actually going back into drought conditions, believe it or not. Parts of the Gulf coastline, Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, I believe spanning into even Georgia and South Carolina, are slowly headed back towards a drought setup, despite Helene having gone through that area, I want to say just about a month ago now, give or take, approaching a month. As a matter of fact, yeah, I believe she made landfall on, the 25th? Somewhere around there. So we have all that dry air from our previous frontal system. I will pan the camera back over the United States real quick, and you could see moving through Minneapolis, approaching Chicago, Illinois, the Great Lakes. You can see another area of troughing and frontal activity working its way down. The front that will be coming through us here within the next day or so is actually positioned from where Montreal here on the top right corner of the United States-Canadian border, New York, Richmond, down through Kentucky, Tennessee, getting into the Dixie Alley region in the southern plains of Texas. That's going to be our next cool front. Not too extraordinary, to tell you the truth. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. I do see the chat on Just Weather popping off a little bit. Good afternoon, PM. Good to see you, Rodney Shelby. I completely agree. We're going to talk about that in a little bit. John Romero, excellent question. So if you haven't done so already, definitely head on over to News 6, the actual website, or if you have our app, definitely download the app, and you can watch my latest web story. We did a bit of a, there's Jonathan in the background right there, as a matter of fact. You can kind of see him in the distance. He'll probably pop his head in here momentarily, perhaps, but so on my latest web story, both an article that I wrote and a video that I shot to be aired on television, I'd mentioned that this looks to be the finale of our 2024 hurricane season, with this passage of such a potent and strong, or I should say enhanced is the correct term, MJO coming across the tropics along the equatorial regions. That's going to stir up some potential troublemakers down in the Caribbean. We're still watching. Confidence isn't extremely high, but it is definitely a pretty decent area of interest that a lot of big-name meteorologists and I'm sure National Hurricane Center are watching. Within the next 24 to 48 hours, we will be within the 7-day threshold. And if NHC is feeling comfortable enough with slapping a yellow blip down there, I do believe we're going to see that popping up either by tomorrow, if not very early Friday. So we're going to keep an eye out on that as well. Once the MJO can rock through and we get another dose of very high wind shear, dry air to come across the United States, dipping down into the Gulf and eventually the western and northern peripheries of the Caribbean, that should lock us up. Looking at some of the very long-range ensembles, the 35, 45 days, both the GFS and the Euro are in very solid agreement that this is probably going to be it. This is going to be the last little primetime slot for the Atlantic to try to misbehave and produce a named storm or two. And then we're probably going to start closing up shop. You know, we can't ever rule out a sloppy homegrown system off one of these fronts. It's very typical of this time of year, climatologically or historically speaking. Usually at this point in time, we do start to fixate more on the Caribbean, the Gulf of Mexico, or just off the coast of the Carolinas, like we saw with Ophelia last year and other homegrown systems. But right now, the only big player we're watching is going to be with the MJO passage in the Caribbean. Zooming us down into the East Pac, however, this satellite image doesn't really do us justice or do it justice. Let me go ahead and see if I can. I'm going to stop this and change the actual satellite so we can take a look at Kristy. Now, for those of you who may be curious, Kristy, believe it or not, is Nadine. It's kind of like the Frankenstein's monster of Nadine out there in the Pacific now. So this is Kristy. This was the crossing over of Nadine that crashed into Belize in the Yucatan Peninsula, popped off immediately after working its way back over open water and blew up into a major hurricane and is still rapidly intensifying. I'm just about positive at this point that this system is more than likely going to breach Cat 4, maybe even Cat 5 intensity. You can see here on the high-res infrared satellite shot, I'm going to have it right over top the storm. You can see very strong thunderstorms, quality CDO, cirrus dense overcast on all quadrants of the storm, perfect symmetry, and that eye very quickly clearing out. So this is deepening and deepening quickly. National Hurricane Center does think this is going to continue off towards the west-northwest, likely to play a role in no one's weather, just something we can admire safely from a distance. Not an Otis, not a John from this hurricane season. So thankfully, this is going to stay far out into open water and no harm nor foul there. So with that being said, let's continue on with the brief. I'm kind of running on a limited schedule here, folks, so I do apologize if it seems like I'm rushing through. I will address questions. You hear, good to see you in the chat. Paul Short, hello from Oxford, England. Nice to see you're still here. Absolutely, yeah, we are definitely still here. He said homegrown. I think the GFS is spot on. I think we'll have multiple storms hitting Florida back-to-back soon. Forever blessed, let's not go that route. We are hurricane... I don't even know how to describe it. We are hungover from all the hurricanes that we've had. We've had 3 so far. 2 majors, 1 Cat 1, approaching Cat 2 with Debbie back at the very beginning of August. Right now, we are tracking 1 that will likely form up. Let me backpedal on that. I'm not going to say likely. We don't even have anything designated from National Hurricane Center, but there is a pretty quality potential. I say quality because we've had a consistent signal. It hasn't been going back and forth. The only one that has been going back and forth, per usual, has been the European model and its associated ensemble members, but everything else has still been pretty much steadfast. So this actually needs to be updated. I pulled this up from an old show that I had, so please ignore the fact that Nadine and Oscar are not crossed out. We have officially seen Nadine and Oscar, and I will go back and update this. This is off of my storyboard. I hadn't touched this since we were talking about the end of Milton, looking at potentially Nadine forming up out there. So go ahead and mentally use your imagination. Scratch out Nadine, scratch out Oscar. They have come and gone. They are no longer on the game board for us in the Atlantic. Next couple of names will be Patty, Raphael, and Sarah. Now, Patty does look like it does want to try to form up, start spinning here within the next 7 to 10 days, 10 days being the maximum. We're targeting anywhere between October 30th, the eve of Halloween, Michael Myers' favorite holiday, all the way out until maybe November 1st, the turn of the new month, the final countdown to the end of the calendar hurricane season. Patty may try to develop. No major indications that we're going to have a potential Raphael on its heels. Right now, we're just looking at one possible storm down in that source region being the West Caribbean. So we're going to have to wait and see. We'll have to kind of give it a little bit more time to see if we start to see another signal beyond what could possibly form up and turn into Patty. But as we stand right now, we're looking at one system. All of our ensembles, all of our global models are showing just the one possibly forming up down there. And we're going to keep a close eye on that time frame on the calendar between the 30th and about the 5th of November. I was going to say October. I can't believe how fast time is flying. This is going to be a look at the latest Climate Prediction Center tropical hotspots, or for those of you familiar with this chart, the Global Tropics Hazards Outlook for predominantly the Atlantic basin. You could see a small sliver of an above 20% chance, less than 40% chance out there over the southwest and central Atlantic, south of Bermuda. That was what was left of Oscar, maybe trying to do, a second wind, but that's not going to be happening. And then they actually, with the recent issuance of their latest chart, have upped us to a 40 to 60% chance of tropical activity in that same source region that we had been bullseyeing. So I know a lot of folks are taking notice of this, that even CPC is kind of getting a little bit more bullish in the anticipated projection for October 30th through November 5th. You can see the timestamp there at the top in the legend of the barcode, or the headline or the windshield banner there. So we'll have to wait and see. We're definitely still in a holding pattern, but we will have large-scale ingredients in place to produce some tropical activity. This is a random glance, I guess, at a local headshot. I'm not too sure where this chiclet popped in there. Let's go to the next chart. Let's see what is going on here. Let's play it from here. There we go. So I used this earlier on take 6 to just kind of like a breakdown of where it is that we are watching, particularly highlighted in red. That's going to be the source region we'll be monitoring and what we have in terms of the favorable conditions. Now, that's one thing I want to emphasize for sure, because I've been seeing the web story and the videos making their rounds, and I'm seeing a lot of really bad information out there. I'm not too sure what's going on out there, to be quite frank with you all. But there has been a sudden surge of misinformation across social media. We started with Nadine is headed right for us. It was supposed to make landfall in Florida last Thursday. That didn't happen. We had crystal clear weather conditions and comfortable temperatures across much of Florida and the rest of the southeast. Then they started to mention that Nadine could turn out in the southwest Atlantic and hit the east coast of Florida. That ended up being Oscar, and we still didn't get a landfall. And now I'm seeing other big-name meteorologists in the career field highlighting some of the new YouTube videos that are popping up, saying that we have another threat for Florida. Now, I'll tell you right out of the gate, are we watching for a potential threat to our area? I'm going to shoot straight with you. Yeah, because anytime anything forms in the Caribbean, especially this time of year, there's always that 10% shot that it does try to work its way towards Florida. But again, 10% leaves us with 90% it's not going to happen. So that's where we stand right now. We're still waiting to get a very comfortable and confident signal on something actually manifesting itself within these favorable conditions that are expected to take shape at the very tail end of this month, just in time for the spooky holiday for those who actually celebrate it, or at the very minimum dress up and go doing a little trick-or-treating with the family, the kids. But as we stand right now, if you're seeing any of the good old clickbait, any of the good social media hype, nothing's coming to Florida right now, and we don't even know if anything's forming just yet. I will go ahead and say, Kristy. And, again, there are caveats to this, but right out of the gate, the GFS has been doing okay this hurricane season. And this signature that it has been producing alongside the Canadian, the Icon being, a little hit or miss, it's still very far out in time, so you're barely capturing that environment. The Euro ensembles and the Canadian ensembles, as well as the GFS, have been highlighting on this very potent signature for a few days now. So the confidence is there, and it's very slowly growing. This is not something that just suddenly spawned in overnight. I've been seeing some thumbnails out there saying that this is extremely rare, this never happens, and this most definitely happens. This is actually right on schedule with climatology, with history, with the hurricane season, just like with Milton. It was a very weird setup that it moved off towards the east, but it's not impossible, and it's not something we've never seen before. We've definitely seen that. It's just, unfortunately, we got what would be the worst case scenario of an event like that unfolding the way that it did. So we have the large scale rising moving in, brought on by the MJO. Our moisture is going to go up. Right now it is looking a little dry out there with the removal of Nadine and Oscar on both sides of the AOR, but that MJO is going to help to kick up a little bit more of the showers and storms. As a result of that, the wind shear is going to relax as well. The trough that had originally brought down all that fall weather for us in Central Florida is going to retrograde to the north just a little bit, and then naturally the Caribbean is probably the only region that really has not been fully tapped of all of its ocean heat content and the hot sea surface temps. The Gulf of Mexico has cooled down pretty well, and the Atlantic Basin has actually dropped off in terms of its really anomalous warmth that we've been talking about since 2023. So that is a bunch of good news. We just got to watch what happens down there, where conditions are still marinating enough to produce a tropical storm, if not a hurricane. So this is mainly for our folks tuning in over on the News 6 channel. And the reason I say that is because on Just Weather, I know Jonathan has really hammered home all the quality info on what the MJO, the Madden-Julian Oscillation, is. I know I have a lot of folks from Just Weather that came from Weather Center Nazario, my personal YouTube channel, so you're very familiar with how that works. But in layman's terms, this is what we're looking at in terms of the MJO. It's moving from the west to the east, and it's focused right along the equator between 0 degrees latitude, maybe about 2030 north, 2030 south. It's a fairly expansive area of just unsettled weather and rising motions in the atmosphere. And the reason you see here stormy over the Caribbean, the Southern Gulf, and Central America, and then dry upstream over the Pacific is what goes up naturally in the atmosphere and in life in general has to come back down. So wherever you have the MJO parked, you've got all the rising motion, all the favorable setup for tropical or even just general garden variety thunderstorm activity. And on either side of that, you get that resulting sinking air. So wherever the MJO is, you're going to see more favorable large-scale conditions for tropical genesis, and on either side of that, if it's not in a favorable phase for your area, you're going to have drying and sinking air. And right now, that's kind of where we are. We're getting into the periphery of things getting better for tropical activity, and despite that, we still had Oscar and Nadine. So it goes to show that we are still somewhat ripe to get a named storm or two out there, and the MJO that's coming through is fairly robust. So again, like the title of the video, the title of the live stream, and the title of the articles that we've been pumping out at News 6, this could be the finale. This is probably the last time in the hurricane season itself the MJO is going to come through, and from bottom to top, all the way stacked up, where everything's going to kind of go green for anything to try to form up. This is going to be our tropical probabilities. I'm going to have to take a look at this, and I'll probably pull you into a screen share to see what the latest European model looks like, because I know this is last night's run at 0Z. The Euro is not as, excited about something trying to develop down there, which is a little weird because the long-range ensembles and the overall upper-level anomalies in terms of your rising and falling actions in the atmosphere do still show a strong signal right about this time. The GFS, on the other hand, has a strong signal, and it kind of goes into what's called a standing wave, where it just kind of parks itself over the Caribbean, over the the western portions of the Atlantic Basin. And that's where we're probably going to see more phantom storms on the GFS. This first one that we're tracking doesn't quite seem to have that phantom signature to it, but because of the fact that the anomalies in our velocities, the rising actions in our atmosphere, because the GFS does not show propagation or movement of the MJO. It kind of just stops over the Caribbean. We will likely see the GFS pumping out Cat 4s, Cat 5s, even after whatever this first signature does, whereas the Euro is not quite as friendly with that type of setup and actually does show fairly quality propagation of the MJO. And I can show you that, guys, right here as a matter of fact. Let me go ahead and pull some stuff up here before I switch us over. In fact, let's see if we have any of our ensembles from the European model at 12Z coming in just yet. Doesn't quite look like we're there yet. So I will go ahead and switch the screen, get us over to our virtual desktop. Let's fade that in. So what we're seeing here is going to be the European Control member. This is a conglomerate, a consensus of each individual ensemble member. And for those of you who are unaware, the European ensembles are a total of 51 individual computer members. And to kind of strip away all the meteorological jargon, it's essentially like a focus group at work. You have 51 people in a meeting, and you're going to take a consensus vote of, do you think this is going to happen, or do you think this is going to happen, based on weather data that's plugged into the computer. And so when you have the control member putting out these results, that's essentially a census of the entire group's thought process put into this is most likely what we're in most agreement with. And you can see between the dates of 26 October to, we'll say about maybe mid-November, the first 2-ish weeks of November, you have all those green and teal colors over our Atlantic and over our Caribbean, which indicates the movement of that MJO and our rising motions, that instability, that extra oomph that will help to develop any kind of tropical thunderstorms. Notice I didn't say cyclones because we've had movement with the MJO during parts of August and September, and because of other factors out there, we didn't get too much going on. I'm going to just glance over at the chat real quick. Kevin Rivera, I hope you're okay. I see your comment. This heat is not normal in the Caribbean intense. That's probably what's keeping the waters hot too, and I'm very sorry to hear that you ended up dealing with that heat exhaustion, that heat stroke. Most definitely. The latest GFS now shows a hurricane. I'm not going to finish that comment for the sake of those tuning in because we're not going to talk about that. In fact, that's probably the GFS just being the GFS and producing its what I call social media sillies for people to share all over X and Instagram. Look out, it's coming. And, you know, the ensembles I'll show you here in a second do not corroborate that whatsoever. So that is definitely a huge outlier. Do not put a bunch of stock into that. Ronnie Shelby, I do agree. The Euro has been very late to the party, and it's been initializing very badly with a lot of our hurricanes out there, Beryl being the #1 misnomer out there. Remember when it was a Cat 5 in the Caribbean and the European model kept starting a new model run with a tropical depression or a tropical storm. So I don't know what gives with that. Oh, Demi, you're very welcome over on News 6. That's 20% north of the islands is something different from Oscar. Snyder Gaming, well, it could possibly be just something else that some of the ensembles have shown as well. The European model I noticed over the last 36 hours has shown a couple of weird individual members forming something in the Caribbean and then a couple of low-pressure bubbles popping up to the north of Hispaniola. Very unlikely to happen because that's going to be within high pressure out there over the Atlantic. So, I think what they're stamping there is just historically speaking, where you could get at the very tail end of a stationary front some tropical vorticity or spin that could develop into a weird, disorganized named storm. We never had a washout on Halloween. Zachary, I hope that's not the case because a lot of our long-range models have gone back and forth. Originally, we were seeing another big cool down for Halloween. I was pumped. I'm going to be suited up, masked up. A lot of us here at the station and other folks out there who are celebrating are going to be getting into their costumes. And now we're looking at heat. So we're not excited about that, let alone any rainfall. So we'll kind of take a closer look at that here as we go forward in time. We still have about, about like 11 days, give or take? 11 days? No, I lied. Halloween is next Thursday, isn't it? Something like that. So we're getting close. So we're actually about like 8 or 9 days away from Halloween. Still some time to see exactly what's going to happen out there. But as you can see here on the Euro, That's where you can find the MJO propagating through from the 21st of October. This is a time phase chart, so that the highest point is going to be real time, and as you go down, that's actually going further in time. So this chart goes from the 21st of October to the 6th of December, and you can see as we go through time, the MJO moves from west to east and eventually exits our area, the Atlantic, by about mid-November, and we go back into a more unfavorable, large-scale environment. Okay, if I switch us over to the GFS 35-day, you'll notice a pretty night and day difference. If you look, the MJO comes in right around the same time, the 26th of October, but then just kicks it, and it turns into a standing wave. And what a standing wave is, like the name implies, if you're just standing still, you're not going anywhere. So imagine you're standing up at attention for military folks out there, or you're just standing there listening to somebody. That's what a standing wave is. You have the MJO, which is a large-scale atmospheric wave that's moving, and when you hear a standing wave, it's a wave in the upper levels that would typically create thunderstorms, bad weather, you name it, and it's just standing still. It kind of just stopped. Like so. And that's why I do believe that even beyond whatever happens late October into November, just judging by these velocity anomalies here and all this rising action over the Atlantic, I do believe the GFS is going to keep spitting out random tropical cyclones, multiple tropical cyclones at that, depending on what other favorable characteristics that it has for us. Now let's get into the fun stuff, and I say fun very loosely. I don't mean that. Don't take that to heart. I don't mean fun as in we're going to have a lot of exciting moments here, but this is where it gets very interesting. These are going to be our 12Z GFS ensembles. We're going to look particularly at the ensembles here. We're not going to look at deterministic models this far out because they just really don't know what's happening yet. Ensembles are the key when looking long range and before a storm has formed. And as you can see here, the GFS today has lit up like the 4th of July or the New Year as we get ready to roll towards the full holiday season. And as you can see, yes, this does look very concerning. There is a confidence signal here, but for those of you who had pointed out in the chat already that the GFS at 12Z has a hurricane following Helene, notice that not a single ensemble member goes up that way. The general consensus is either over Cuba, Jamaica, the Cayman Islands, and off to the east of Florida through the Bahamas, or through the southern tip of Florida, which, you know, I'm not going to lie to you guys. I'm being very straightforward and blunt here. That would just be garbage, in my opinion. We had 2 hurricanes in the Big Bend. We had Milton just rip right through the heart of the peninsula. If we received a hurricane in South Florida now to round out the hurricane season, I do not want to imagine the fallout. I don't want to imagine it. I don't want to imagine how hard we're going to be working overtime if that were to unfold. So that's where we stand right now, and this is echoed by a few of our other models as well. Well, I'll go ahead and refresh this and see if we have any more of our European ensembles in for 12Z and take a look at that. It looks like we might be able to get fairly far in time. Let's see. So yeah, there we go. Not a actually that's a decent signal right there. Fairly decent signal. You can see one random weenie member, as I like to call it, goes up through the Yucatan Channel. That is definitely an outlier, but again, if I could illustrate and draw on this chart for you all, the key, or I should say the average guess, the best guess by the ensembles here is either very, very, very southern periphery of Florida through the Bahamas or just straight up crossing over Jamaica, kind of scraping the Cayman Islands, going through the central and eastern Cuba and up and out, kind of like what Oscar did, following in that same fashion. A lot of this is really going to come down to how Mother Nature sets up her chess players and plays the game of tropical chess. If it forms up at a perfect opportunity to miss a front and then catch another front, it may work its way off towards the west before boomeranging back to the east. If it catches a front and then loses the front on the opposite end of the spectrum, it could start off going towards the northeast and then coming back towards the west, which we have seen indications of that. If I switch us over to 6Z or even 0Z, as a matter of fact, 0Z shows the same thing. If I go to the 0Z GFS ensembles, notice how a number of them, they kind of right there, they start off going towards the northeast and then they boomerang back towards the west, very similar to what Nicole did in 2022. That is a possible solution on the table if, again, these possible solutions are very determined by if a system forms up. You look at the 6Z GFS and you can see the same thing. You see a cluster of them just kind of wrapping around. You have a large group that just goes up towards the northeast. Careful game of timing, and then you have other ensemble members that ricochet up into the northeast and then boomerang back towards the west. So couple of outliers, definitely different possible solutions and outcomes on the table, but nevertheless, the average thinking is there. Caribbean, north or northeast? Yes, I do agree, Rodney, for sure. If Miami receives a hurricane at this point in time, all bets are off. This is going to go down in history, this hurricane season. I believe this hurricane season is already amongst the top 5 costliest in, or I will say most costly. That just sounds a lot better. I know costliest is a word, but most costly hurricane seasons on record. And that's preliminary numbers because we're obviously not done yet. We just don't know what'll happen. I do agree. We can squeak out more than one. Just right now, let's take what we have and what evidence we have on the table and focus on what's in front of us. And right now, we just have one clear signature that we're tracking. We come over to the Canadian ensembles, and you can see for 12 Zulu, the Canadian ensembles are singing the same song and dance. They go off towards the west and then boomerang back up towards South Florida, or just simply exit the Caribbean and move off towards the northeast, playing no role in the United States weather outside of some rip currents and high seas along the coastline, maybe some beach erosion, but this would definitely be a player for Jamaica, Cuba, even parts of Haiti and Dominican Republic, the Turks and Caicos, and the Bahamas to watch. So as we've always mentioned with these types of setups, regardless of where you are, that's a pretty decent signature for 12Z today. So the euro is definitely trending back up in terms of model agreement. So I'm very curious to see what happens. This is the latest run for the 23rd today at 12Z. You can see a number of our individual model members showing the low pressure bubbles there. So yeah, that kind of solidifies everything, that we've been talking about. Nothing concrete, nothing on the board yet. National Hurricane Center still a little too far out for them to designate anything, but I would imagine, I would mark my words, we'll probably have a blip on the radar here on their charts within the next day or so. Could be as early as tonight. Highly doubt it because I think on average we're still about 8 days, give or take, away from true tropical genesis or formation down there. But within tomorrow, Thursday, if not Friday at the very latest, we'll probably have an 0 for 20. An 0 for 20. But that's all she wrote, everybody. Like I said, we're going to go ahead and not make this a very long-winded Tropics Watch. I know Jonathan has been taking some time for him and his family, which is excellent. We all need to do that. I'm very happy that they enjoyed themselves and he could disconnect before coming back to this possibly. And I'm going to go chat with him shortly after this. But unless there's any questions out there, that pretty much wraps us up into a nice bundle. We're going to keep a close eye on things, and hopefully with me working more consistent hours between the Navy and flying around for major hurricane coverage, I'm going to start also doing these live streams alongside Jonathan more recurringly so we can talk more. What is the maximum amount of storms that have made landfall in Florida in one season? Right now, history is fashion. Ironically, I believe 2004 still reigns king. I know a lot of folks will say Ivan was a Florida storm. Technically, it did make landfall just barely to the west of Pensacola, but given the fact Pensacola received the right front quadrant in the eye wall, a lot of folks still consider Ivan a landfall in Florida. And then when it came back around, it hit Florida as, I can't remember if it was a depression or a very weak tropical storm, but it definitely did come back around and hit the east coast of Florida again. So regardless, you can tack that one onto the list. We had Bonnie that season, Charlie, Francis, and Jean. So that was a total of 5 named storms that hit in 2004. Right now we're at 3. For 2024. And I believe in 2005, we also had 3, Katrina, Rita, and Wilma. So we're neck and neck for 2005. We're on the cusp of trying to go toe-to-toe with 2004, and we shall see. We'll see what happens here. I personally don't have a ton of confidence that Florida really needs to pay attention to this. I really do think that we're going to catch a front and kick this east. But naturally, for that bottom quarter of the peninsula, from like Lake Okeechobee south, I would say keep an eye on this. At least keep one eye open and check back with us for recurring updates just to be on the safe side. Because as you can see here, I'll refresh the page. These are our European ensembles, and they are showing a pretty healthy signature. Yeah, look at that. Actually, as a matter of fact, the Euro actually has a few more members this run coming towards Florida. So I don't want to cause any stress or any tension. Trust me when I say that we're right there with you, trying to keep this thing at bay, kind of like going Dracula, Vampire, The Lost Boys for the Halloween season. But, you know, we can't argue with the computer models. And so it's definitely something we're going to keep an eye on. That is true. Dennis did affect the keys as well in 2005. But alrighty, everybody, thank you so much for tuning in today. We're going to go ahead and start cutting the live stream. It is 2:50. I'm going to get ready to check in with Jonathan, talk a little bit with him, and then hit the road before afternoon rush hour cranks up, and then I'm on the road for what feels like 3 years. So we'll see you all again soon. If you have any questions, comments, or concerns, drop them in the comment section down below upon the conclusion of this live stream. Keep us in your subscriptions. Keep your notifications turned on. Consider clicking subscribe to Just Weather and News 6 WKMG so you can get all your latest tropical and local weather information brought to you by the Digital Weather Team. There we go. I always get that messed up. The News 6 Pinpoint Weather Team and the Digital Weather Center here, hosted by Jonathan Kagas and myself, as well as the rest of the weather squad out here at News 6. And we will catch you again very soon, probably within the next day or so. In fact, if anything continues to trend up, we may even go live again tomorrow just to talk tropics with y'all. But until then, this is